Somehow Palpatine returned.
Everyone says Disney ruined Star Wars, but that's kind of like saying Yoda is the reason the Republic fell.
Right.
Disney didn't ruin Star Wars. But wait, before you decide what I mean by that, hold off the angry comments for a second, because otherwise you'll just prove my point. This isn't a video defending Disney, it's about something much bigger. I'm just laying out a few ideas, not to convince you, but so you can decide for yourself once it all fits together.
It was better than old.
Thumbs way down.
You didn't like it?
No, I think I deserve a public apology from George Lucas.
Like that long-eared alien dude.
It'll be a great movie 20 years from now.
Which the movies are for children, but they don't want to admit that.
What if Disney never stood a chance? Lucas was hated for the prequels, so Disney tried to do the opposite, and that made it even worse. But why? And that's exactly where everything suddenly starts to make sense, because it turns out the real villain isn't Disney, and it isn't Lucas either. The original trilogy took the world by storm. Let's for once skip all the behind-the-scenes stories about how Lucas got there. The drafts, the production drama, all that. Let's just look at the time these films came out and what they did to us as fans.
It's an epic of heroes.
They were released in an era defined by new special effects and the rise of the blockbuster, not Skywalker. Science fiction was still in its infancy compared to everything that came later, and somehow these movies became an unexpected phenomenon. When they released the first one, even the filmmakers barely believed it would work, and yet it turned into a cultural explosion. We can credit the groundbreaking model work and visual innovation for that, or the sharp, fast-moving story that kept audiences hooked. If you're a film nerd like me, check out this video, where I use the South Park creator's storytelling rule to test the first movie, scene by scene. But think back to when you first experienced Star Wars, or just think about what those movies are, compared to the kind of stories you usually enjoy. There's something special about them, something you can feel but can't quite explain. It's adventure made for kids, but told seriously enough that adults could believe in it too. They mix childhood wonder with real themes and characters chasing dreams we all can recognize, no matter the genre. That balance is really hard to recreate. There are 1,000 ways that mix could have failed completely, but somehow it didn't. So from that starting point, where do you take a universe like this? Would it have been smarter to make the next movie right after Return of the Jedi? Or would we just have ended up with a watered-down cash grab series? A good beginning followed by a disappointing tale of sequels. Still, waiting has its own problems. The more you try to please the fans, the more you risk losing the original audience, because every generation ends up with their own first Star Wars. So let's jump ahead 16 years to when Lucas finally released his long-planned prequel trilogy. After 16 years of waiting, the expectations had grown to astronomical levels. But when Star Wars finally came back, it wasn't just the movies that had changed, it was us. An entire generation of fans had built their own unique versions of what the galaxy far, far away could become. How did Darth Vader turn evil? What was Obi-Wan's backstory? The trailer for The Phantom Menace created historic levels of hype. Some theaters even held special screenings just for the trailer. People lined up to see it. Fans even bought tickets to other movies just so they could see the trailer before going home. So when Star Wars finally returned in 1999, it faced impossible expectations. And somehow this channel returned. If you want to keep the saga going, like, subscribe, and let the algorithm awaken. But Lucas still took the challenge, trying to deliver everyone's dream at once. He didn't let fear of studio pressure stare him, and instead made the story he believed the fans deserved. He expanded the universe, introduced a much larger political conflict, and showed the galactic machinery that had only been hinted at before. It's easy for a vision like that to get watered down by commercial compromise. Lucas didn't do that. He put the story and his own creative instincts first. But something had changed in the meantime, and it was bigger than all the expectations combined. The world that the prequels entered was completely different. Digital effects were now everywhere. Movies like Terminator 2 had changed what visual storytelling could look like, with help ironically from Lucas' own company Industrial Light and Magic. Lucas had been waiting for technology to catch up with his imagination, and yet ironically it was the same technology that made people feel the magic was gone. Seen from the outside, you could argue that Star Wars, as Lucas originally imagined it, might actually look more like the prequels, a mix of magic and fantasy inside a shiny, hyper-technological world. The problem was that in the 70s and 80s, the technology to make that world simply didn't exist. So should he have waited 20 years before starting Star Wars in the first place? And if he had, would those movies ever had the chance to become what they did? Star Wars is for kids, but fans just don't want to admit it. Lucas said that in 2005. And chances are, you might be one of the many who found the prequels lighter, more childish than the originals, especially if you saw the first trilogy as a kid. Jar Jar Binks and bright CGI weren't necessarily aimed at a younger audience than lightsabers, droids and Ewoks. Okay, maybe Jar Jar was, but let's not pretend Ewoks were high-end art either. But here's where it gets tricky. The audience that once embraced Star Wars with wonder had grown up. If you were 12 when A New Hope came out, you were 34 when The Phantom Menace hit theaters. And 34-year-olds want very different things from movies than 12-year-olds do. Meanwhile, a whole new generation of 12-year-olds was waiting to discover their version of Star Wars. So as a filmmaker, how do you satisfy both groups? Kids discovering it for the first time, and adults guarding their childhood memories? You can't. You hold your ground and you make the version the story itself demands. Service later showed something fascinating. The generation that grew up with the originals still preferred those, while kids who grew up with the prequels loved their trilogy more than their parents ever did. Many critics blamed the prequels' reception on tone and writing, but maybe they weren't weaker at all. Maybe the audience had simply changed. Maybe 20 years of nostalgia had hardened into expectations that no movie could possibly meet. I'm not saying the prequels are flawless, far from it. But maybe the biggest problem wasn't the movies themselves, maybe it was us. Fans want something new as long as it feels old. Star Wars had become something bigger than a movie. It had become a religion, one that no longer tolerated new interpretations. And every time the saga was renewed, a new generation of fans was born. And so was a new wave of outrage. All the criticism and backlash left George Lucas disillusioned. He's admitted that the harsh reaction from fans and media genuinely hurt him, and they played a part in his decision not to make any more Star Wars films. And honestly, who could blame him? The original trilogy was made with no expectations, not for the first film at least. He had this enormous vision inside him and somehow turned it into 3 of the most iconic movies ever made. Then he followed it up with another trilogy under imaginable pressure, facing fans who now had 20 years of nostalgia to protect. So it's not hard to see why it didn't feel like doing it all over again. To the joy and horror of many fans, Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney in 2012. And this was a very different time. Social media, global fandoms, and an era of completely obsessed with nostalgia. The Force Awakens broke tradition by releasing in December instead of May. It marked a new era in the saga and became one of the highest grossing films in history.
The garbage will do!
It tried to merge modern CGI with practical effects to recapture the look and feel of the originals. The new film also focused on diversity. A female lead, a more inclusive cast, which many appreciated, while others dismissed it as agenda-driven. Critics noted how The Force Awakens mirrored A New Hope, something the filmmakers admitted they did intentionally. Many critics even called The Last Jedi one of the best films in the series, while others saw it as the ultimate betrayal of their childhood heroes and the Star Wars universe itself. To be clear, I'm not excusing the plot holes or storytelling issues in either the sequels or prequels. I'm just looking at what the filmmakers were up against, and the history they had to carry on their shoulders. Because Disney faced every challenge Lucas did, and more. But the world had changed again, and the rules for what the audiences wanted had flipped completely. We live in a time that loves to tear down its heroes. Audiences today don't want invincible plot armor heroes or black and white morality. They want nuance, characters you can question, and stories where even the good guys can fail. Shows like Game of Thrones taught us that, but when Star Wars does it, it feels like a personal attack. So, what do? Make movies that follow the modern standard and risk alienating long-time fans? Or repeat everything that worked decades ago, knowing it will feel hollow? Maybe the best thing you can do is to try to find a middle ground. Make modern films with the DNA of the old ones. But that's like walking barefoot across burning coal. It's almost impossible not to get burned. And again, I'm not defending every creative decision by J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson. I'm just saying, imagine the number of choices they had to juggle, and how many versions they must have abandoned before landing on what ended up on screen. Just like the generational divide between the originals and the prequels, we saw an even stronger backlash to the sequels, mostly from fans who grew up with the first trilogy. It's nostalgia at work. Older fans have a deeper attachment to their heroes, and they're less open to change. So Disney brought back the icons, Luke, Leia and Han, gave them some tragedy instead of pure heroism, and placed them beside a new generation of characters meant to carry the story forward. But that choice came with its own risks. Luke Skywalker as a disillusioned old man was too much for some people to accept. Many fans said Rian Johnson ruined Star Wars, while younger viewers less tied to Luke were more open to it. The result was a generational split wider than ever. The old heroes now had to fight 30 years of built-up expectations across 2 generations of fans, while still making room for new ones who just wanted their own story to believe in. And interestingly, the backlash to the sequels made a lot of people start re-evaluating the prequels, and realizing maybe they weren't so bad after all. Audience expectations and critic reactions have always shaped the course of Star Wars. The overwhelming success of the original trilogy set the foundation, while the backlash to the prequels pushed Lucas to hand the saga to new creators. And who better to continue a magical space adventure than Disney? But that meant facing 3 generations of fans, all with their own ideas of what Star Wars should be. Was there ever a version of these movies that could have made everyone happy without drowning in criticism from one side or the other? I'd go as far as to say it wasn't Disney that ruined Star Wars. It was our impossible expectations that ruined Disney's chances to succeed with it. Maybe it was an impossible task from the start. Maybe Star Wars didn't get ruined by Disney. Maybe it's Star Wars that ruined Disney. Star Wars began as a story about hope, about generations passing the torch. And that's exactly what it still is, just on a different level. Lucas, Disney, and all of us as fans keep playing the same roles over and over again, in a galaxy that never quite learns. In 2018, Bob Iger announced a slowdown in Star Wars film production, hoping to avoid franchise fatigue. Disney began focusing more on series instead, but by then maybe the damage had already been done. The real question is whether the damage was done by Disney or in spite of them. If you disagree with everything I just said, congratulations, you're officially part of the cycle. Thank you for watching, and remember, legends never really end, they just find new storytellers.